If one went through life, particularly in high command, trying to do the things that were popular or well-liked, if one had to gain votes or increase one's box office rating, one might behave differently. But it would be a sad day, so for me, I would find it a very difficult discipline to learn to try and please people. People either can take one because they, on the whole, value one, or they can dislike one, or fear one, or despise one. It leaves me cold. All I want to know is, was I right? Were they wrong? Will they eventually come round and see it? Or are they so dumb that it'll have to be their children or grandchildren who see perhaps this series of films in 50 years' time will realize that I was fairly reasonable, and the people who thought I was wrong were the ones who were unreasonable. Without that sort of self-confidence, it would be difficult to carry on.
The end of a unique television occasion, 12 episodes of A Television History, the life and times of Earl Mountbatten of Burma, spanning the years of this century and taking in most of the globe. The programs have been an outstanding success, the audience enormous, the critics on the whole kind. The Sunday Times, for example, described them as easily the finest factual series ITV has ever done. The one carping note concerns the man at the center of it all. Can he, some critics asked, and ask again this morning, really be as perfect as all that? Did he never make a mistake? Well, now, Geoffrey Golden and I are going to put the questions many viewers must be asking to you, Lord Mountbatten, and to your colleagues in the making of the series, Peter Morley and John Terraine. Now, as you said just there now, the belief that you were right. Without that, it would indeed have been hard to carry on. But do you think now, viewing the series as a whole, that you perhaps told us you were right too often, as the Sunday Times asked? Why does he keep on telling us how good he is?
Well, as a matter of fact, John Terraine, the scriptwriter, used to ask me the whole time, you sure you were right again? You must have been wrong sometimes. And I started looking through my life, which I'd never done before. I looked at the big decisions with hindsight to see if I felt that I'd have given a different decision. And the awful part is I wouldn't. I can find really nothing that I'd have done differently. And I think the reason is this. There were very rarely Napoleonic decisions made by myself. They were made in company with my commanders or my staff in discussion, generating a common thought, what I used to call the spirit of the hive. So we all came to the conclusion this was the right thing to do. And even after that, I would then set it up in the form of history. I'd say, well, what will history in 20 or 30 years' time think of this decision? Will my grandchildren or great-grandchildren think, oh, great-grandpa wasn't such a fool? And if it passed that, I'd do it. Now, the fact that it may not have been popular at the time simply didn't influence me. But looking back, there are very few things I'd have done differently myself, that when I'm dead and history really dispassionately comes to be written, people may think I was wrong. All right. I'm quite content to let history judge me after I'm dead.
But Lord Mountbatten, in retrospect, therefore, now, with the same sort of hindsight as sometimes crept into the programs, do you really think that we saw enough humanizing emphasis in these programs simply because now, even now, here and now, you can't look back and see a mistake?
Well, it isn't that I can't look back and see a mistake. If a mistake could be pointed out to me, I'd be glad to accept it. But when people have tried to point out mistakes, and we've had a discussion, I'm sorry to have to tell you, the discussion has usually ended in favor of the decision I then made.
But can I quote you actually something that Ivan Rowan, the defense correspondent in the Sunday Telegraph, said? He said, the real qualities and defects of a remarkable man are often blurred in a tumult of pomp and circumstance. I think this is the point, actually, that we're trying to get at.
Well, when you say a tumult of pomp and circumstance, these boys produced the pomp and circumstance. I didn't.
Yes, but Lord Mountbatten, it was your series. It was you in front of the camera.
Well,
however much it was
all right, but I mean,
them.
There wasn't any pomp and circumstance about my ugly old face. The pomp and circumstance was in all the sort of documentaries they produced and all the sort of background to it. I may be very pompous in talking. I didn't know I was. But I would have thought that that was a fair criticism, perhaps, of the series, but not of the victim who really was just being interviewed.
But to the viewer, appearing as you were almost faultless, isn't there a danger that he thought you were almost inhuman as well?
Probably, but I don't mind being thought inhuman as long as I was right. It would really be a pity if anybody who had to make decisions on which tremendous results depended were to make these decisions light-heartedly without having thought them out properly, and then find out, oh God, that was wrong, I wish I hadn't done that. I can think of any number of things. Perhaps the thing I've been most criticized for is the operation at Dieppe. I was asked, would I carry out again? The answer is yes every time, and I'll tell you, if we had not carried out that operation at Dieppe, I don't believe the invasion itself would have taken place, and if it had, it might have ended up in disaster. We had to learn.
Can I put one other point, and that is, in that case, looking back, when have you lost your self-confidence?
When have I lost it?
Yes.
How do you mean?
On what occasion in your life, looking back now, have you consciously lost your self-confidence?
But I wouldn't be where I am now if I had ever lost it. That's the difference, isn't it?
Amen, thank you.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, it's very unattractive.
No, I think that's fair enough. And you said last night and you said now that you don't care what people think about what you do, so long as what you do you believe is right. Now, why did you do what you did? You know, fame is the spur, Milton said. You weren't doing it for popular acclaim. What kept you going with all the tremendous things you had to do in your life?
I think that I'm born with an excessive energy. Even nowadays, I work till 1 or 2 o'clock at nights. I had an ambition to do well in whatever I turned my hand to. And I suppose the satisfaction was to see a job coming out well. And that, I suppose, is what kept me going.
Did you have any other ambition beyond seeing an undefined job done well?
Not consciously, no. But you know, you get great satisfaction. This is the point. There's no satisfaction as great as the satisfaction of work that achieves what you're setting out to do. It doesn't matter what it is, big or small.
The series, to a large extent, has not been controversial at all, and you're not really a controversial man. Why not?
I'm the most controversial man that you could possibly imagine. When history is written, I suppose after I'm dead, somebody will get at all these papers I've kept at home and write it. They'll find I was pretty controversial. And the point is that I haven't brought controversy out, because controversy is controversy with other people. Either they're living, or worse still, they're dead. The only fair way to settle controversy is to look at the evidence that's available in the form of letters, telegrams, minutes exchanged, and let them decide after one's dead, when they haven't got to please anybody, whether one was right or wrong. So if controversial items have been kept out of the TV series, this is, if you like, a thing I asked for. But I think John Terrain, the scriptwriter, will probably tell you that I didn't conceal anything from him. He had the right to pick anything he liked.
Can I, before in fact we go on to John Terrain, follow up that point with one which to some extent involves him too. You sometimes gave the impression in the series of being anxious to defend yourself against critics of your decisions and actions. Have you, in fact, been subject to really hard criticism? Obviously you have in your life, but it hasn't appeared in the series.
Well, I don't know, it hasn't altogether appeared in the series. I had a criticism at the end of the program about India. I said, this gives people the impression everybody thought I did a wonderful job. They didn't. They thought I did a terrible job. So my wretched son-in-law, John Braben, who'd only just married into the family, was pulled in to explain how bitterly I was criticized, and mostly by people who were my friends.
But, I mean, can I actually quote you one or two of the lines
Yes.
that kept cropping up in the series? I've actually written them down. Once again, Mountbatten's role was to grip a crumbling situation to give the ship of state in India a sense of being steered again. Another one, once more in a time of danger and difficulty, Mountbatten, and then it went on. And above all, perhaps, when talking about the Indian invasion of Hyderabad, you said, I discovered that there were people who blamed you for this sad event. I found that most unfair, you say. After all, I'd done to avoid such a thing happening. Now, why are you excusing?
Well, the first two excuses were made by John Terrain, not by me, so you must ask him.
Yes, but equally, I mean, you know,
The last one was made by me, because I found even cabinet ministers in England thought that I had somehow engineered the invasion of Hyderabad by India instead of trying to stop it. They didn't realize that I'd used my influence to the last to prevent it happening. And when I left, Hyderabad themselves tore up the agreement they had themselves proposed. Therefore, I felt it was very unfair when I'd done all that and risked my whole reputation in India to get it through, that what Hyderabad did, I should be blamed for. And history will show that I think that this was not a case where I could be blamed at all.
I think what I'm probably getting at, though, in a sense, is this use of the word unfair, which is a very unusual.
Well, it's unfair because anything is unfair when it is based on absolutely inadequate knowledge. It's unfair if people criticize you for something which you were in no sense responsible for. That's unfair. If they criticize for something that one takes responsibility for, if I had advised India to go into Hyderabad, that would have been fair criticism. But I had urged them not to. They had accepted the Nizam's own terms, and the Nizam tore them up. Then to be accused of this, that I call unfair, don't you?
John, can we now, in a sense, put this point to you, the sense in which some people certainly got the impression that Lord Mountbatten was, or your commentary was, excusing situations? Perhaps not necessarily Hyderabad, but there are others.
I don't think it was excusing. It was trying to explain. And you take what Lord Mountbatten's just said about Hyderabad, and I see that point with absolute clarity. So naturally what I wrote reflects that point of view. I entirely and completely agree with it. It was desperately unfair to be accused of doing something when you had, in fact, been trying to do the very opposite of that thing. That is unfair. I don't see that what else you can call it. As regards the other lines that you were quoting there, I thought they were fair. He did grip a crumbling situation, and as I saw it, he'd been doing that at rather regular intervals for the last few years.
And this is the whole point, because this is what came out in the series, that almost everything that Lord Mountbatten tackled, he tackled in this extremely, in a sense, overwritten manner as far as the commentary was concerned.
Well, you're making criticism of my commentary. I can't...
Right.
I don't know what I can say about that.
Can we now move on to India, which easily, I suppose, was the biggest assignment of your career. I'm sure you'd be there. Now, is there anything, this again comes back in a sense to the first question, is there anything in the way in which you handled the granting of independence and partition which you regret now?
Yes, I regret that I didn't have the chance to grip it before the situation had gone sour. If the day after Japan had surrendered, I had been instructed to hand over the Supreme Allied Command in Southeast Asia and take over the Viceroy's job at that moment, one had a chance. Positions hadn't been irretrievably taken up. By the time I came out, the Congress Party had already passed a resolution to demand that India should become an independent sovereign republic. The Muslim League had already had their direct action day in Calcutta when 5,000 were killed and 15,000 injured because they insisted on a separate state. I took the situation as I found it.
Could you have prevented those things, do you think, then?
Yes. If I'd been there earlier, I think I could have. I think history will show that it was difficult to prevent at the time. I would like to say something about this. You see, in the extent of one or 1.5 television programs, you can't tell the whole story of India. To begin with, you've got to explain to millions of people what the situation was in India. But I haven't tried to dodge the issues. In fact, I have actually, all the vice-regal papers are the property of the Viceroy. All the Governor-General's papers were given me by Pandit Nehru. These, at the suggestion of my Chief of Staff, Lord Ismay, I've placed in the hands of a historian he selected, Henry Hodgson. He's had them for 5 or 6 years to go through. He's now written the first completely factual account based on the actual written evidence, The Great Divide, coming out later, I think, this year. And that's where we will see what happened, and that will answer the questions that people who had a pre-knowledge of the situation felt I hadn't adequately answered.
And have you read that book?
I read the manuscript. I made a few suggestions, most of which Mr. Hodgson said, well, it's my opinion, it's not, I don't want your opinion, which he didn't take. He only took factual corrections. I think it's historically fair, and I'm prepared to stand by that particular judgment.
To continue with India and specifically in the reference to programs, for instance, in the script about your return from India, Lord Brabourne mentions that Winston Churchill simply refused to speak to you. But the script, the commentary, John's commentary on your program didn't say why.
I can tell you why. I don't have to tell you what a friend and admirer I am of Winston, who was the greatest Englishman of our era. But he had a weakness about India. He went out there as a subaltern in the 4th Hussars, in 1896 or 7, whatever it was. He played polo. He read Rudyard Kipling. He had all that atmosphere. And he was in that era in his mind, and he never adjusted himself to it. He wanted the British to rule India forever. He couldn't bear to see any transfer of power. The fact that it would have required 7 British divisions at least, additional in India, national service up to 4 years in perpetuity, 30,000 leaders rearrested and put back into jail to hold on to India, that didn't seem to count with him. The fact is, I had, in fact, not only given India independence, but partitioned India, although I was carrying out government instructions.
But you did have plenipotentiary powers.
I had plenipotentiary powers, and the plenipotentiary powers could not have been used to reverse that situation, even if I'd wanted to. What Winston objected to is summed up in this. He came to the dinner party which the king very kindly gave my wife and myself to welcome us back. I thought he'd come as a friend. I waltzed up to him, and he held up his hand and said, "Stop, Dickie, stop. What you did in India is as though you had struck me across the face with a riding whip." He turned his back on me, he didn't speak to me for 6 years. And then, all of a sudden, when he selected me as first seat, we were back intimate friends and remained great friends ever since. This was because emotionally he was so upset that his friend should have done this terrible thing. And a lot of people thought like that.
But then, you see, in episodes 9 and 10, did you really, in a sense, pay enough attention, almost historically, to the awful strife that followed partition, which was as much your responsibility, even if towards the end you weren't there, as in fact what led up to partition?
Yes, well now, let us just get the thing in a bit of perspective. The best assessment of the number of casualties you're talking about was 200,000. That's a terrible figure. But you realize when I came out to India in October 1943, we were in the grip of one of the periodical famines. The whole of this vast country, Bengal, with a population as great as the British Isles, had a terrible famine. 2 million people died in that famine. I gave up 10% of my military shipping space to bring food out to save their lives. I think I saved more people from death by famine than ever lost their lives in that in the riots afterwards.
But surely, Lord Mountbatten, in terms of the famine, you couldn't really have done anything else, could you?
Not only could I have done something else. In fact, I was reproved for using food, civil food, in military consignments. So far from not being able to do anything else, I was criticized for doing what I actually did do. So
then
please don't think I could...
Right. I mean, to come back to the program and the strife after partition, how affected were you by what went wrong after partition? Or did you, when you left India, feel that you left India?
No, look, I stayed on. I didn't have to. Most people advised me not to stay on. My wife advised me not to stay on. I stayed on because I wanted to see the thing through. I got Gandhi to go down to Bengal, and he and Surawadi together did the miracle of holding strife in the city of Calcutta, which I could never have controlled with military. I hadn't got 2 Gandhis, and so in the case of the Punjab, I had a hand-picked boundary force, 55,000 officers and men of hand-picked units, and they were swamped by the millions of people who moved. Now, I'm an Englishman. I didn't foresee it at that rate, but nor did any single Indian, and none of the leaders, nor Mr. Jinnah, nor anybody else foresaw this at all. But I stayed on to face the music and to try and help put the thing straight. Now, that's the least I could do. I didn't run away from India until it really had settled down.
Eamon, back to you.
You were talking about, the facts and figures and some items, backgrounds you've told us now that wasn't seen in the series. Were you able to tell everything you wanted to tell in the making of the series, or did you have to, for official secrets reasons or other reasons of your producer, keep back information?
Well, the only information I obviously had to keep back was discussions in the course of having been Chief of the Defence Staff. I had access to special information. For instance, Suez. I went as far as I could go to say what I thought about Suez, more by implication than anything else. But as regards the rest, I didn't keep back anything from the producer or the scriptwriter. They saw every single thing. And I think that the right person to ask is one of them, because they were responsible for what was in and what was out.
Well, I will come back to the producer and writer after this. Just let me ask you one question at this stage about the series in general. What did you hope, what did you feel when you started it would say to people? What was the effect you hoped at the end of it people looking at it would have?
Well, I'm going to be quite honest. I was thoroughly muddled about how it was going to happen because I'm not a professional. I couldn't even begin to see how they could do it. It was my son-in-law, who is a film producer, John Braben, who persuaded me to do it. What intrigued me was I felt here was a chance to perhaps tell a story in an easily understandable form for my grandchildren, indeed for the youth. For the youth of this country and other countries, I felt it was a nice way to tell history. Because after all, it was the life and times through one person who was present, either as a witness or perhaps as an actor in it. But how it could be put together, I had no idea at all. I'm not a pro. And I was prepared to accept exactly all the decisions they made, how it was to be done. And I gave them all the information they wanted. I answered all their questions.
Did you hope that a particular message would come through, or just that it was a showing of a piece of history?
No, I think the message I hoped would come through was that on the whole, that this era through which we've lived showed that our country was great and that we had something to be proud of in history. And I, in my humble way, hope to be able to contribute to an understanding of this. Don't you yourself feel a little bit the better for having seen it?
Yes, I do.
That's it. Well,
we're going to take a break there on that commercial of my own for Lord Mountbatten series, and we'll be back with more questions, in fact, for the man who made the programs in just a moment. Well, we turn now to the people who made the series, as I told you we would. Peter Morley, you and John Terraine called this series, Life and Times of Lord Mountbatten, a television history. Why?
Well, it took us a very long time, in fact almost 2 years, to try and coin a phrase on what to call it. When we started, we had no idea in the first place what we'd let ourselves in for. We decided not to make a television memoir of Lord Mountbatten, but to paint the whole passage of the whole of the 20th century, focused on the life of a remarkable man with a remarkable career. And television, the very medium, if you compare it to the written word, the biography or the autobiography or the written history, is bound to be superficial. And therefore, if one were to compare this television series to what will be the definitive biography of Lord Mountbatten, which will be written after his lifetime, it can only tell a certain part of the story in a special way which television only can do it. And therefore we've decided to call it a television history because we feel that only television can sketch history in this particular way. It will never, ever replace the written word, and we've considered it all the time that it is totally complementary to the written word, and therefore we had to think of a name.
Yes, that's why you call it history. If it's complementary and, as you say, superficial, John, where do you see the place of television history as opposed to definitive biographies and so
on? Well, this is a very interesting subject. It's one I'm rather sensitive about because the place has not yet been completely established, I think. It's something we're in the act of doing. There are all sorts of ways of doing it. This is a very different format, for example, from the BBC's Great War series, which I was also concerned with. I think what one has to realize is that history itself nowadays can be expressed in a variety of different ways. I mean, for example, sound radio has a way of doing it, or a potential of doing it. And television has a potential of doing it. You can never get away from books, of course. I mean, books are the ultimate repository of history. I found myself more or less drowning in a sea of books and papers in the course of creating this television history. You're bound to.
So do you think this is for people who don't read books, or to encourage people to go and read the books?
I don't think one wants to see it in terms of an opposition. I mean, as Peter Morley said, it's a very complementary thing. And whereas a mass of hard, factual knowledge can reside in a book, there is an impact in television which a book can never do. And I think that from time to time in this series, I mean, you take a thing, Lord Louis referred, for example, to the Bengal floods and famine in 1943. You can read all the statistics you like about those in a book, and they're all true and terrible, and if you're imaginative, you get something from it. But my goodness me, you see them on the screen, that's something else again, isn't it?
But John, if you had been writing a television history about Lord Mountbatten rather than for him, would you have written it differently?
I should think the answer to that is certainly yes, of course I would. Each of these situations...
in what way?
Well, I was about to say, each of these situations commands a treatment. The fact of Lord Mountbatten's presence in the thing, the fact that he was going to contribute personally a great deal, is decisive.
But does it inhibit your writing?
I wouldn't say that it inhibited the writing, it's just that you deal with the thing in a different manner. If, for example, it was the valiant years, Winston Churchill, now dead, you see, you do something quite different. And Lord Louis had, you know, a definitive biography, which is going to be done about him. After he's gone, will not avoid areas of controversy which you are bound to avoid today because they're irrelevant to the getting across of a long, strong story in a limited number. I know 12 hours sounds an awful lot, but it really isn't an awful lot when you have to do it.
Lord Mountbatten, do you feel that these two were too kind to you? Were there some editions of the 12 that you liked better than the others?
Well, I was surprised how kind they were. I really expected to be put through it. And I may add, they weren't half as kind to me when they were investigating me as they were on the screen. And I was rather comforted to find that all this investigation has produced this apparent effect on them, because nothing I could have done could have stopped them from showing me up to be quite a different sort of person. I like to think I'm the sort of person that they did on the whole show up.
Did you watch the programs, I mean, apart from when they were finished on the screen?
Of course I did. I'd never seen them before in a proper order. I'd seen fine cuts, sometimes rough cuts, at different times. I'd never seen them following each other in a chronological sequence with a week to get over each item. To me, it was absolutely fascinating, and I'd been stuck glued to the goggle box until last night. Now I'm now released. I can do things on Wednesdays. I'm going to the British Film Academy for next Wednesday for the first time out on a Wednesday night.
But was there any aspect of the series that, retrospectively now, you'd like to have changed?
Well, I thought I was going to like to change program 12.
Which was last night?
Yes, I thought I was going to like to cut it out.
Why?
Well, because I wasn't allowed to see what they were going to say. They said they were going to try and say what they thought of me, and I didn't think that they necessarily thought very highly of me. I saw it last night. I was agreeably surprised. I was particularly touched with what Prince Philip said about me. He never said anything of that sort to me, to my face in his life. I had no idea he actually thought so highly of me. I'm quite surprised, and I shall have to thank him next time I see him.
But in a sense, you would perhaps rather have changed that last program last night.
Not now that I've seen it. I would say no, I couldn't have done it. I didn't like the idea. It was their own idea. I enjoyed the sort of family bits. That was great fun, seeing all the grandchildren, but I don't know what everybody else thought about it.
But should we really, Lord Mountbatten, believe, to any extent, that you had so little interest in what was written about you and for you?
I don't know what you mean by so little interest. I mean...
Well, I mean the fact that you passed virtually, the programme's over, to...
May I chip in?
Yes, I think so.
Look, one thing I think we make quite clear, that right from the very start, which is now almost 3.5 years ago, the three of us formed a very close-knit team. And the actual process of making the programmes involved Lord Mountbatten as much as it involved John Terraine and myself. In fact, without knowing it and looking back on it now, we established Lord Mountbatten's spirit of the hive in the actual making of this programme. And everything that was done, although Lord Mountbatten, as he himself said, is not a pro and couldn't visualize the finished result, the actual process of creating each program was done on a basis of absolutely frank discussion, violent arguments quite often, but always for the right reasons. I mean, we never fell out. You know, in the end, we always came down to the thing that was important that we wanted to do, and it was a mutual agreement and a mutual decision. So he was deeply involved in the making of except this last one. You see, this last one, this was an arbitrary decision by me right at the beginning, that I knew that the disciplines which television demanded to tell a factual story would mean that inevitably one would have to leave out the sort of the personal details. And I always felt right at the beginning that whatever happened, no matter how many programs we were going to make, that the last one would be a much more subjective treatment by John Terraine and myself to try and get a little bit under the skin of Lord Mountbatten. And
let me come back to Lord Mountbatten there on that very point. When you say under the skin, we talked about ambitions earlier on, you explained these, but you've never, as we saw from these series and know anyway, have refused to serve your country. Are there any circumstances now that you could see arising, even though it may sound a little fantastic, where you would be prepared to lead this country? There's an interesting line in one of the papers, Peter Black in the Mail this morning. He said, "It's bad luck for our side that the British system of democratic politics fails to attract such men."
Well, I'm going to be 69 this year, and it'd be bad luck for the country if they attracted an old gaga like me at this stage. So I think they're very lucky that this doesn't arise. I've never had any political ambitions. I'm prepared to serve the elected representatives of the people and carry out the policy they've decided on. That, I think, is exciting and fun. But I think that to try and win an election and make a lot of promises, I wouldn't want to do that.
If you were 30 now, where would you look to find the challenges that you so obviously need?
Well, that's a hypothetical question. I'm not 30, and I don't really approve of breaching democracy, is what you're suggesting, trying to get in by the back door. And if one had to get in by popular acclaim, one would have to promise a whole lot of things one would not necessarily believe were the best things for the country. I am very satisfied with the role I was permitted to play, and I have no sort of feeling that I'd like to have gone back into politics.
Whether someone is in politics or not, do you think that leaders of any nation you care to mention are diminished in any way, their mystique or their power or their personality, by appearing on this medium?
Well, I think that the only way that you can really get a popular book about somebody is to point out that they were wrong, they were fools, and so forth. The criticism which Golden's given us tonight is that people keep on saying, how can he always be right? How can he be shown in such a favorable light? How can he be shown as with all this pomp and glory? In fact, he is voicing the opinion of those who want to knock anybody's head any success. To hell with them. Why do they have a success? Knock them. That will sell a book every time, but
Not
success
completely. Not completely. Can I in fact take
Yeah.
up, you see, one critic has said that you've been displaying to us in the series a style of leadership. I think it's quite an interesting point. Now, to what extent do you feel that style of leadership, your style of leadership, your leadership, remains appropriate today and will remain appropriate in the future?
Well, it always remain appropriate because leadership is a method of putting over a policy which is going to be carried out in a way that everybody believes in and goes along with you. Leadership means that people know you. You can't be a leader if you aren't known. And I think, therefore, that there's always room for that. There's a vast difference between that type of leadership and the type that goes to the polls and decides to say, you elect me and I'll see this and that happens.
Now, it's 20 years ago since you gave freedom to 400 million Indians and Pakistanis. Yesterday, Anguilla was invaded, where there are 6,000 people. Is this the end of the road of the empire? How do you see now the future, since you do project all your thoughts and actions of the future? What is the future of this country?
Well, I think the future of this country can be great. We've reached the stage when we have voluntarily given independence to the whole of the Commonwealth, and I hope that they remain as a free association of nations. We can pull ourselves together. We did in the war. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't do it again. I think we're going through a bad patch. I think everybody does. But I personally see us coming back again as a very great nation.
A final question, Lord Mountbatten. This series has made you, on top of everything else, a television personality. Has this changed your life in any way?
Well, probably like yours was changed. I mean, you now get recognized. You go into a restaurant, you may get better service, but you also get people coming up with autograph books. You can't easily go into a theatre without people coming up. And, of course, one's inundated with fan mail. That's where you get a lot of it.
Were they all in praise of the series?
Well, funnily enough, no, they weren't all, but I had several hundred that seemed to think it was good, and I had 3 that thought it was bad. They were quite entertaining. One thought that I was a cowardly sadist who just enjoyed seeing people killed. But another wrote on behalf of the family. They said, you know, your conceited personality with that ridiculous flag and tune, while the whole family roll round every Wednesday afternoon, every evening, every time it comes on. What gratified me is they still sit on every Wednesday to all roll round the floor.
Thank you very much, Earl Mountbatten. Gentlemen, good night.